That night was the first time I understood the ocean can get into your house without opening a single fucking door. My wife was on shift up in the control room, and my kid was asleep in his rack, the little curtain pulled shut like a bunk on a ferry. I woke up around 2 because my bladder didn't care that we were 100 miles off the coast on a steel platform bolted to a living, moving black thing. The apartment they gave families was just a module welded to the accommodations deck. Thin walls, narrow corridor, a galley the size of a closet. Everything humming all the time. You got used to the constant vibration the way you get used to your own heartbeat. I slid out of bed in socks and padded into the corridor. The lights were off. The emergency strips along the floor glowed dim green. The air smelled like warm metal and damp laundry and a bite of salt that never left your throat out here. And there, in the middle of that corridor, was a child-shaped silhouette. Damn it, I said out loud without meaning to. The word just fell out of me like a drop tool. He was 6. Daniel, bare feet on the cold deck, arms at his sides, swaying the tiniest bit like he was standing on a boat. Daniel, I whispered, because even when you're scared, you don't want to wake the whole module. What are you doing out here? Nothing. No blink. No little, I had to pee, or I can't sleep. Just that fixed stare into the dark, his eyes open and empty like he was looking through me at the far bulkhead. Sleepwalking. That was the first thought that made sense. He'd done it once about a year back, on shore, before we took the contract. I hadn't caught him in the act then. I just found him asleep at the kitchen table like someone had paused him mid-sentence. I stepped closer. In the dim floor glow, I could see the whites of his eyes, wide and too bright. His lips were parted. I put my hands on his shoulders, gentle, the way you do with a diver coming up from narcosis. Slow movements, soft voice, no sudden shock. You don't jerk them awake. You guide them. Come on, I said. Back to bed. He came with me like a puppet, feet dragging. His skin felt cold and damp under my palms, like he'd been standing by an open hatch. As we reached his little cabin, he mumbled, slurred, voice thick with sleep. Under the bed. You don't have a bed, I murmured automatically, then corrected myself because in my head everything was still bed, even though it was a rack. You're sleeping in your rack, bud, not under it. Under, he said again, and there was a tremor in it, like he was trying not to cry. There's someone under the bed. A second later, from behind me, from my own cabin, I heard a soft, wet rustle. Not footsteps, not the normal creak of hull metal. A wet sound, like someone shifting on a plastic tarp, or a fish flopping once in a bucket. Quiet, close. My stomach did that drop you get when you hit a cold layer underwater and your body realizes it's not in charge. Coincidence, I told myself. Ship noises, platform noises, ventilation, the sea slapping the legs. I eased Daniel in his rack, pulled the curtain, tucked him like that mattered against whatever he was dreaming. He stopped swaying, his chin dropping to his chest like the trance was fading. I stood there with my hand on the curtain, listening. The wet rustle stopped. I forced myself to move. I walked back down the corridor, careful, even though part of me wanted to sprint. I pushed into my cabin. The air inside was warmer. I could smell our sweat in the sheets, my wife's shampoo, the metallic tang that came from the HVAC ducts no matter how many filters you changed. I flicked the light on. Nothing. No open locker. No speed gear. No wet footprints. Just our bed bolted to the deck, my duffel shoved under it. A coil of rope hanging on a hook because you never stop being a rig rat even in your own room. I knelt, checked under the bed out of sheer, stupid instinct. Like this was a suburban house and not a steel box at sea. Nothing. Just dust bunnies and a lost sock. I stood, scanned the corners, listened to the hum. Total silence besides the constant thrum of the platform. No rustle, no drip. I stood there long enough for my own breath to annoy me. Then I shut the light off and went back to bed. Sleep came fast, the way it does when you're exhausted and you've trained yourself to grab it whenever you can because schedules out here don't give a shit about bedtime. I don't know how long I was out when something yanked me back up. At first I thought it was an alarm. My body snapped awake hard, adrenaline dumping into my blood like someone cut a line. But there was no klaxon, no red lights, just a sound nearby, soft and wrong. Through the fog of half-sleep, I heard my son's voice. "Dad," he said, close like he was right beside my ear. "Look over here." My eyes popped open. The wardrobe was wide open, both doors flung out like they'd been kicked. Our clothes were everywhere, shirts, socks. My wife's work uniform scattered across the cabin floor like seaweed washed up after a storm. A hanger swung slowly, tapping the wardrobe frame with a light metallic tick, tick, tick. I pushed up on my elbows, trying to process it. My brain grabbed for the easiest answer. "Daniel, sleepwalking again. Kids do weird shit." "Daniel," I hissed. From the corridor, his voice came again, and this time there was a giggle in it. "Dad," I swung my legs out of bed and my feet hit the deck. It was cold. My socks soaked up condensation like they always did, because nothing out here was ever truly dry. I stepped into the corridor. The emergency strips glowed. The air felt colder than it should have, like the HVAC had pulled fresh outside air straight from the night sea. Daniel's silhouette stood in the doorway, just like before. Same shape, same stillness. Only now his head was tilted slightly, like he was listening. Then he bolted. He ran down the corridor toward the galley, laughing loud, a child's laugh that bounced off the metal walls and came back wrong, tinny and stretched. His feet slapped the deck. Wet slaps like bare feet on a pier after swimming. Is he doing this in his sleep? I thought, and the question didn't feel cute or concerned. It felt like a rope tightening. "Daniel," I barked, harsher than I meant, because fear makes you mean. He didn't slow down. I chased him. My hand found the light switch by the galley hatch, and when I slapped it, the overhead fluorescence hummed and flooded the small space with cold light. The galley was empty. No Keith. No movement, just a table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, a microwave, a kettle, a little porthole window that showed nothing but black outside. The sea at night isn't dark. It's a solid thing, a pressure against glass. I stood there with my mouth open like an idiot. My breath puffed out in little clouds I hadn't noticed before. Then I heard a laugh above me. It didn't come from the corridor. It came from directly over my head. I looked up. On the ceiling, above the galley table, was my son, not clinging, not hanging from a pipe like a monkey. He was standing on the ceiling like the ceiling was a floor. His hair hung up toward the deck, as if gravity had flipped for him alone. His pajamas clung wet to his body, darker around the knees and elbows. His face was too calm, too pleased. He smiled down at me like we were playing a normal game. "You found me," he said. My throat went tight. My skin prickled. I felt my heart slam against my ribs like it wanted out. "Daniel," I said, my voice cracked. He blinked slowly, and for a second something shimmered around him, like heat distortion, except cold, like looking at a face through water. "Now it's your turn," he said, and his tone shifted, still bright, still playful, but with a buzz underneath, like a generator spooling up. "I'll count to 10 and come looking for you." His eyes were wide. Too wide. Not child-wide. Just open. Fixed. Hungry. "But I will find you," he hissed, breathless with excitement. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I bolted out of the galley like I was clearing a flooded compartment, lungs already burning with panic. My feet slapped the deck, and the corridor seemed longer than it ever was, the emergency strips warping under my vision. Why did I run to Daniel's cabin? I couldn't tell you. Instinct, maybe. The stupid hope that if I got to the real Daniel, the thing would break like a bad dream. I slammed his cabin door shut behind me and whipped around. Daniel lay in his rack, snoring softly, one arm thrown out, face relaxed in the way only kids can manage. The little night light by his pillow glowed faintly. A cheap plastic fish that played ocean sounds when you hit a button. He was asleep, real asleep, not standing on any ceiling. My brain stuttered. A laugh echoed down the corridor outside the door. Not the giggle from before. This was a deeper laugh, still childlike in shape, but wrong in the way a radio transmission is wrong. Too clean, too close, like it was inside my skull. Ready or not, it sang, "Here I come." Then the footsteps started. They came fast, too fast. Heavy thuds, like someone running in gear, but also wet, the sound you get when you slap a flipper on a deck. They hammered down the corridor toward Daniel's door with impossible speed, and with each thud, I swore, I heard a faint little splash behind it, like a trail of seawater appearing out of nowhere. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Silence, then a playful chuckle right on the other side of the thin metal. My hand shook so hard I couldn't make fists. I crawled backward across the deck toward Daniel's rack like some kind of animal. My shoulder bumped the rack, and Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering. The moment his lashes opened, the chuckle in the corridor cut off mid-breath. Not faded. Cut, like someone yanked a plug. Then, this is the part one still hates saying out loud. There was a heavy thud, like a body hitting the deck, and immediately after it, a wet slap like something dropped into shallow water. Daniel sat up, rubbing his face, and grabbed my arm with both hands like he was falling. "Dad," he whispered, voice thin. I had a scary dream. I stared at the door. The corridor outside stayed silent. No breathing, no shuffling away, just the platform's constant hum, and somewhere far below, through metal, the sea pushing. What? I swallowed. What kind of dream? His eyes filled instantly, like he'd been holding it in even asleep. "I dreamed that he was chasing you," he said, and his little fingers dug into my skin hard enough to hurt. "I dreamed you found him on the ceiling, and then he counted, and then he came for you." My mouth went dry. "Who is he?" I managed. Daniel shook his head violently, tears spilling. "The one who pretends to be human." A cold wave washed through me, the way cold water flushes into your suit if you blow a seal. That's just a dream," I said, because what the fuck else do you say to your 6-year-old on a platform at sea at 2 a.m. when he just described what you lived? He clung tighter. "He wanted to hurt you," he whispered. "Remember I told you he played with Mr. Pavel?" Mr. Pavel was the guy in the neighboring module. Older, quiet, always smoked on the leeward side of the deck, even though it wasn't allowed, just to stare at the horizon like he was waiting for something to come up. Daniel had told me weeks earlier, offhand, that he'd dreamed a man like Dad, but not Dad, was in Pavel's room making him play. I'd laughed then, said kids dream stupid things. A month after that, Pavel got found dead in the shower block. They told everyone he slipped. They always have a clean story. Slip, hit head, drowned in 6 inches of water like a rookie. The medic called it unfortunate. HR sent an email about safety on wet surfaces. Nobody wanted to talk about how Pavel's eyes looked, wide open, fixed on nothing, like he'd been staring at the inside of a pressure suit. I was shaking so hard the rack rattled. "Do you want me to sleep here?" I asked Daniel, forcing my voice steady, lying like a professional. He nodded fast. "Please." So I squeezed into his rack with him, cramped and sweating, my knees tucked, my arm around his small body. He fell back asleep fast, the way kids do. Like a switch flips and they're gone. I lay there staring at his cabin door until my eyes burned. Back then, I didn't fully understand what any of it meant. I didn't have a name for it besides a bad night. I told myself it was stress. The platform does weird things to your head. The constant noise. The lack of real darkness. The way you can smell salt even in your cereal. In the morning, when the shift changed and the module filled with normal voices again, I checked everything like an idiot. I went into my cabin and found the clothes scattered across the floor like before. Some of them were damp. Not wet like they'd been soaked, but damp like they'd been hung in fog. No footprints. No puertas. No kid on the ceiling. And that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. It didn't happen every night. Sometimes we get a week of normal. Sometimes 2. Long enough for me to breathe and tell myself we were fine. Then something would crack again, and the ocean would sneak into our little steel box through a dream. The pattern was always the same. Daniel would have a nightmare, and somehow, some way, the nightmare would become real in the module. Not like a feelings reel. Physical. Measurable. You could touch the damage. You could smell it. You could mop it up. And this is the part that still makes my skin crawl. Every single time when Daniel woke up, the thing would vanish. Like it never existed. The consequences stayed. We started calling them nightmares because I couldn't stand saying monsters like I was in a children's book. Nightmares fit because they came from a sleep and because they left you with that same sick feeling in the gut. The same sweat-soaked sheets, except this time your wall had dents in it or your galley was flooded or your wiring was melted. My wife didn't want to hear it first. She worked offshore longer than I did. She had that hard practical way of thinking you get when you've watched people die from stupid mistakes, and you learn that fear is useless unless it makes you act. The kid's stressed, she said after the second incident, when Daniel woke up screaming about a voice in the pipes, and we found the sink faucet running full blast even though the valves were closed. He's on a platform. He hears shit. He dreams shit. The valves were closed. I snapped back. I hadn't slept. I had salt crust in the corners of my mouth from dried sweat. I checked. You can't run water through a closed valve. She stared at me like I was trying to start a fight on purpose. So what you think, what? A ghost turned the tap? No, I said, and my voice rose because I couldn't keep it down. I think something's. Don't say something, she cut in sharp. You sound like those drunks in port towns who blame the sea for their own bullshit. She wasn't wrong to be angry. This was our life. We'd chosen this. We dragged our kid out here for money. We needed the contract. We needed the health insurance. We needed the housing. And saying something out loud made it real. So for a while, we didn't. We kept working. We kept parenting. We kept pretending the platform was just loud and weird, and that was it. Then the nightmares kept proving they didn't care what we believed. The one who pretends to be human showed up twice more over the next month. Always like a game. Always like it wanted me to play. Daniel would start sleepwalking, muttering nonsense, and I'd get that cold prickle in the back of my skull like a sonar ping. That's what it felt like a single sharp ping, not heard with your ears but felt in your bones. Once I woke to Daniel standing by the porthole window in the galley, staring out into Black Sea. The window was fogged with condensation from his breath, except the condensation shaped itself around something, like a face pressed from the other side. Nose, lips, eye sockets, not quite right. The glass creaked like it was under pressure. We were on the accommodations deck, above the waterline. There was nothing outside that window but air and night and the faint spray of the sea. Daniel whispered, not turning his head, "He's outside." I grabbed him and yanked him away. And as soon as his eyes blinked awake, the fogged face shape on the window smeared and vanished, leaving only his small handprints and a wet trail down the glass. Another time, I chased a laughing Daniel through the corridor and found him in the shower block, standing under the cold water, clothes on, head tilted back, mouth open like he was drinking the stream. His skin looked pale and swollen, like he'd been in water too long. He turned and smiled and said, "Your turn," and that same hungry gleam flashed. I slammed the shower curtain and backed out so hard I nearly fell. I ran to Daniel's rack and woke the real one by shaking him until he cried, and the moment he woke, the sound of running water cut off like a switch, even though I hadn't touched the valve. The floor stayed wet for hours. Saltwater wet, even though our freshwater system out here tasted like chlorine and rust. We started doing what people always do when they can't control something. We made rules. They weren't written down at first. Just things we did automatically, the way you do on a boat when weather turns. 1. If Daniel sleepwalked, don't let him leave the module. Lock the hatch. Put your body between him and the corridor. 2. If you heard laughing where there shouldn't be, wake Daniel. Wake him fast. Don't worry about the don't wake a sleepwalker bullshit. That advice doesn't account for a thing that can stand on ceilings. 3. If you heard water where there shouldn't be water, dripping in a dry corner, gurgling in a dead pipe, wake him immediately. 4. Never, ever play along. Don't answer when a nightmare talks like your kid. Don't say its name. Don't agree to its game. Those rules kept us alive. I'm not being dramatic. They kept us alive the way a checklist keeps divers alive. You skip one thing, you die. Even then, the nightmares changed. Not every nightmare was the same. Some just watched. Some wrecked shit. Some tried to hurt you. Daniel had names for them, and that terrified me more than the damage. I'd ask him in the morning, casually, like I was asking about cartoons. "What did you dream?" I'd say while making instant oatmeal that always tasted faintly of diesel no matter what. He'd stare at his spoon for a long time, then say the one who drips backward or the one who lives in the bulkhead, like he was reading off a list he'd always known. I tried to get him to explain how he knew. He'd shrug. "I just know. When I see them, I know what to call them." The worst part was that the nightmares didn't stay in kid logic. They adapted to where we lived. They used the platform like it was their own body. The first one that made my wife stop arguing with me came on a night she was off shift and I was half asleep in our cabin, listening to the wind moan around the platform legs. We heard a pop, not a loud bang, just a sharp pop like a light bulb dying. Then another, like a string of firecrackers in slow motion. The corridor emergency strips flickered. The hum of the overhead lights in our cabin rose to a whine, then cut out, then slammed back on so bright it hurt. My wife sat up immediately, alert the way she always did. "What the hell?" she muttered. The lights popped again and went out. In the darkness, something breathed. Not us, not the HVAC. A wet, hot breath like steam venting. Daniel's cabin door creaked open. I slid out of bed and moved into the corridor, feeling my way along the wall. The air was warmer now, humid, thick. It smelled like burnt insulation and brine, like someone had poured seawater on a live wire. From inside Daniel's cabin, a low crackling sound came, like a fire starting in slow motion. My wife pushed past me with her phone flashlight on. "Daniel," she hissed. The beam cut into his cabin, and I saw it. Something crouched in the corner by the outlet, where the charging ports were. It wasn't a person, not fully. It looked like a shape made out of blackened seaweed and ash, dripping water that hissed when it hit the deck. Its eyes glowed faintly, not red, not yellow, like embers seen through fog. Every time it moved, the lights in the corridor flickered and the smell of burning got worse. My wife froze. She actually froze like her body didn't believe what her eyes were feeding it. The thing turned its head toward us slowly. I saw teeth, too many, wet and dark. Daniel's voice came from inside the rack, muffled, half asleep. "It's the one who comes from the ashes," he mumbled. The thing's embers brightened. I didn't think. I lunged into the cabin and yanked the rack curtain open and grabbed Daniel by his shoulders and shook him hard. "Daniel, wake up." He blinked, startled. Then his eyes focused and he started to cry, confusion snapping into fear the moment he saw our faces. The crackling stopped instantly. The humid heat vanished like someone opened a freezer. The corner of his cabin was empty. The outlet panel was charred. The plastic had bubbled. The charging cable on the floor was burned clean through like it had been cut. Every light bulb in our module blew at once with a sound like gunfire, showering tiny glass fragments onto the deck. We stood there in darkness, phone flashlight trembling, breathing hard. My wife's face looked gray. "Tell me," she said very quietly, and her voice was nothing like her usual tough shit tone. "Tell me what the fuck that was." So I told her. After that, we stopped pretending and started trying to solve it. We went through the normal routes first, because that's what you do when you're still trying to be sane. We got Daniel on a SAT call with a child psychologist the company contracted. The woman's face lagged and pixelated on the screen, and she smiled like she'd never smelled diesel in her life. "How are you feeling, Daniel?" she asked. He shrugged. He didn't like talking on screens. The delay made him angry. My wife tried to explain without sounding insane. He sleepwalks. He has nightmares. He gets scared. Nightmares are very common in children, the psychologist said, nodding with the patience of someone who's never had a light bulb explode because a thing in the corner decided it hated electricity, especially in new environments. Offshore can be stressful. The sounds, the isolation, the wiring burned out. I interrupted without meaning to. It burned out in one night. We had to replace. My wife shot me a look sharp enough to cut cable. We've had incidents, she said carefully. The psychologist smiled wider, like she could fix us with a pamphlet. Sometimes children externalize anxiety into vivid imagery. It can feel real. It can feel very real to the parents. My wife clenched her jaw. It was real. The SAT call froze for a second. Then the psychologist's smile returned, less certain. Have you considered relocation? A break from the offshore environment could help. Relocation. Like we could just hop off the platform and go find a nice dry house somewhere. Like money wasn't the entire reason we were out here in the first place. We requested leave anyway. HR denied it. Operational demands, they said. They always say that. The platform doesn't care about your kids' nightmares. The platform cares about flow rate and pressure and profit. We tried the medical route. The medic on board checked Daniel's vitals, listened to his lungs, shone a light in his eyes like that would reveal an ocean demon. He's fine, the medic said, uncomfortable. Sleepwalking happens. What about the wiring? I asked, and I hated how desperate I sounded. What about the water turning on with closed valves? The medic's gaze flicked away. Equipment issues. Maintenance issues. I maintenance, I snapped. The valves were shut. The panel was burned. That wasn't wear and tear. He sighed and rubbed his face. Look, you're tired. You've been working nights. Don't make this into something it's not. You want me to write ghost in a report? You know what happens if I write something weird? They'll pull your family permit and send you back with nothing. That shut us up for a while. Because he was right. The company didn't help. The company removed problems. So we stayed quiet and handled it ourselves. The nightmares kept coming. There was one Daniel called the one who hides in the walls. On a platform, nothing is a wall. It's a bulkhead. Steel, insulation, cables, pipes. A body of systems. I noticed it first in the corridor near the galley. The wallpaper. Yes, they had wallpaper out here. Some cheap pattern stuff glued over insulation panels to make it feel less like a prison. Had a bulge like someone had pressed their face from behind. There were faint marks, like palms, like someone had been inside the wall pushing out. My wife thought it was moisture damage. Condensation, she said. The insulation's sweating. I wanted to believe that so badly. That night, I woke to a sensation on my forearm. Pressure. Not pain at first, just pressure like a cuff tightening. I opened my eyes and saw my arm pinned against the corridor wall. A hand had come out of the bulkhead, through the wallpaper, like the wall was liquid. Not a normal hand, too long in the fingers. Skin pale and slick like something that had lived underwater. The grip was insane. The fingers sank into my flesh like clamps. I tried to yank back and couldn't. The hand tightened slowly, steadily like a winch. My wife woke to my grunt and saw it and sucked in a breath so sharp it hissed. What? She started. The hand tightened again. I heard a faint crack. Pain exploded on my arm, so white-hot I saw spots. I screamed. I couldn't help it. I screamed like I was drowning. Daniel's door banged, opened down the corridor. He stood there in his pajamas, eyes wide, half awake, drawn by the sound. Dad, he cried. The moment his eyes focused, the hand vanished. Not pulled back. Vanished. Like it was never there. I fell to the deck, clutching my forearm, shaking, teeth chattering. The wallpaper bulged once, like a bubble popping, and went flat again, torn and puckered. My arm was bruised purple and swelling. I could feel something wrong inside, like bones shifted. Later, the medic would call a fracture and ask me how I did it. I told him I slipped on wet decking and slammed my arm into a bulkhead. He nodded and didn't look me in the eye. In the weeks after that, we replaced things constantly. Bedding, clothes, light bulbs, a microwave that filled with seawater overnight, even though the galley was dry. A toolbox that rusted in one night as if it had sat in salt spray for a month. A mirror in the bathroom that grew a thin film of algae along the edges, green and slick, smelling like pond scum, even though we were in the open sea and the bathroom had no natural light. Daniel would cry sometimes because he didn't want to sleep. He'd fight bedtime hard, kicking, swearing in little kid way because he'd learned it from rig workers. My wife would lose patience and snap, and then she'd hate herself for snapping, and then they'd both cry, and I'd stand there useless because what do? You can't outrun sleep forever. Out here, sleep was like depth. You could fight it until you passed out. We tried ridiculous things. We tried sleeping in shifts so someone was always awake to watch him. We tried melatonin, which made his dreams worse. We tried leaving the TV on low all night, ocean documentaries, because the normal sound of waves made him feel safer. The irony of that still makes me sick. The nightmares started to learn our rules. At first, waking Daniel ended them instantly. Later, they started doing damage fast, like they knew they had a limited window. One night, I heard dripping in the corridor. We didn't have exposed plumbing there. No pipes overflow. No reason for dripping. I shot out of bed and ran into the corridor barefoot, slipping on cold water that wasn't there an hour before. The drip came from the ceiling seam, right where two panels met. It wasn't a leak. It was deliberate. Drip, drip, drip like someone tapping a finger. The drops didn't splash. They stuck. They clung to the deck in little beads, and when I touched one with my fingertip, it was colder than ice and tasted like salt and metal when I stupidly brought my finger to my lips. From Daniel's cabin came a whisper. "Counting," he mumbled in his sleep. "Counting." I threw his curtain open and shook him. He woke startled and cried out, and the dripping stopped. But the beads of cold salt water stayed, and when I wiped them with a rag, the rag smoked faintly like the water carried some weird chemical burn. My wife started jumping at sounds. She'd be eating and suddenly freeze because she heard a pinging noise through the deck. "Do you hear that?" she'd whisper. "Idilisken." Sometimes I heard it too. A faint ping like sonar, like a submarine sending out a feeler through water. It came at odd hours, never on a schedule, and it always made the hair on my arms rise. I asked the tech in comms once, casual, try not to sound insane. "You running sonar tests at night?" He laughed. "We're not Navy, man. But there's pinging," I insisted. Like, probably the subsea arrays," he said, shrugging. "The listening post down below. Data packets. You're hearing it through the structure. Everything vibrates. Don't worry about it. Subsea arrays. Listening post. There's an underwater module beneath our platform, part of some old program. Officially, it monitored well integrity and seismic activity. Unofficially, people joked. People always joked about military shit. They're listening for Russians. They're mapping whale songs. They're trying to talk to Atlantis. I started thinking about that module more than I should have. I'd done maintenance runs down there sometimes. Rare, only when something broke. You took an elevator down into a wet moon pool chamber, then transferred into a sealed pod that dropped through the water to dock with a module. It was claustrophobic, the kind of environment that makes you aware you're living inside a thin shell between pressure and death. Down there, the sounds were different. The hull creaked in slow, patient groans. You heard distant knocks that were just the ocean pushing debris. You heard your own blood in your ears. I hated that place. After the nightmare started, I hated it more because I couldn't stop imagining something down there listening back. Daniel started asking weird questions during the day. "Dad," he said once while we walked the deck in the afternoon, the sun low and pale over gray water, gulls screaming around the flare stack. "If you go deep enough, can people walk on the ceiling?" I stopped dead. My stomach flipped. "Where'd you hear that?" He shrugged. "In my dream." My wife's face tightened. She grabbed his hand too hard. "Don't talk about that," she snapped. Daniel's lip trembled. He didn't cry. He just stared out at the sea like it had offended him. That night, he had a nightmare about the one who pretends to be human again. I knew before I saw it. I woke to that sonar ping feeling in my bones. Ping, like a needle in the back of my skull. Daniel stood in the corridor, swaying, eyes open. "Under the bed," he mumbled. "Wake up." I whispered fiercely, breaking our own rule because I didn't care about gentle anymore. "Wake up, Daniel. Wake up right now." He didn't react. From the galley came a soft, splashing sound, like someone stepping in a puddle. Not loud, just wet. My wife sat up behind me, already alert. She saw Daniel's silhouette and went rigid. "Don't," she mouthed. The splashing stopped. Then a voice came from the galley. My wife's voice. "Honey," it called, bright, normal. "Are you still up? I brought you coffee from the control room." My wife was right behind me in bed. We stared at each other. The voice called again, closer now, like it was walking toward us. "Honey? Come on, it's getting cold." My wife made a sound in her throat, half sob, half rage. "That's not me," she whispered, shaking. Daniel's head tilted slowly toward my cabin door, as if he was listening to the voice too. "Mom," he murmured, still asleep. The voice in the corridor laughed softly, just a hint of amusement, like it was pleased with itself. I moved without thinking. I grabbed Daniel under the arms and shook him hard enough that his head snapped back and his eyes finally blinked, unfocused, then found mine. "Dad," he said, confused and instantly scared by my face. The laugh in the corridor cut off like a switch. Silence. My wife slid out of bed and grabbed a wrench off the shelf, because out here your first instinct is always tools. We moved together into the corridor, slow, ready. Nothing. No footsteps. No puertas. No one holding coffee. But the galley table was wet. Not a spill. A thin film of seawater, and in it handprints like a child had pressed palms down and dragged them slowly toward the edge. The next day, my wife finally cracked and went to the OIM, the Offshore Installation Manager. The boss. The guy who could ruin your life with a single email. She stood in his office, fists clenched, and told him flatly, "Something's happening in our module. It's not safe." He listened with that tired expression men get when you bring them personal problems on an industrial site. He kept glancing at his monitor like he wished he could crawl into it. "Are you accusing someone of breaking into your quarters?" he asked. "No," she said, jaw tight. "I'm telling you we've had phenomena. Electrical faults. Water where there shouldn't be water. My husband got injured in the corridor." He sighed. "We can have security check the locks." "It's not the locks," she snapped, losing control. "It's..." She stopped herself before she said, "a nightmare creature from my son's dreams," because she wasn't stupid. The OIM leaned back and steepled his fingers. "Look," he said, voice shifting into that corporate calm. "You have a young child out here. Offshore living is not for everyone. If your family is struggling, we can arrange rotation home." My wife's eyes narrowed. "With pay." His mouth twitched. "It would be an early termination of the family accommodation program. Your husband's contract. So you'll punish us for asking for help," she said, voice shaking with anger. He spread his hands. "It's policy." We left his office with nothing but a cold little note in our file that said family stress. I found out later they started monitoring our communications for safety. They don't tell you that part. You just notice your SAT calls lag more, your emails get flagged, a security guy smiles at you a bit too long in the corridor. Out here, the platform is its own little country. It has its own laws. And the biggest law is, don't make trouble. We stopped asking. We focused on keeping Daniel asleep, and then waking him when we had to, like he was a bomb we could defuse if we moved fast enough. The nightmares grew worse anyway. Sometimes they were subtle. Sometimes they were violent. Daniel dreamed once about something he called the one who sings in the water. That night, the showers turned on by themselves and filled the floor drains until they gurgled and overflowed. The sound of running water filled the module, louder and louder, like the ocean was pouring in through pipes. Daniel lay in his rack murmuring a tune under his breath, something slow and wrong, like a lullaby heard underwater. I shook him awake, and the water cut off instantly, but the drains kept gurgling for an hour afterward, like the system was trying to swallow something too big. Another time, he dreamed about the one who floats upside down. We found the emergency fire extinguisher on the ceiling of the corridor, stuck there like a magnet held it, heavy metal pressed against paint. My wife grabbed it and yanked. It didn't budge until Daniel woke, and then it dropped, almost crushing her foot. We replaced furniture twice because a nightmare that Daniel called the one who swells made our mattress expand in the middle of the night like a balloon. It rose and rose, pushing us toward the walls, until the seams popped and foam spilled out like guts. The smell was chemical and sickly sweet, and it made Daniel gag in his sleep. We had to replace the module's wiring again after another visit from the ash thing. Maintenance guys muttered and blamed salt air and cheap installs. They didn't ask questions. They didn't want answers. I started noticing little things that didn't fit even when there wasn't an active nightmare. Like wet footprints in the corridor that led nowhere and dried without leaving salt. Like a smear on the porthole window that looked exactly like a hand dragged across from the outside, except we were still above the waterline. Like that sonar pinging getting more frequent. Ping, ping, ping. It got into my head. I'd hear it even when it wasn't there. I'd be eating and suddenly taste salt and metal and think about teeth in a too wide smile. My wife and I fought constantly. Not cute arguments. Real ones. Ugly ones. She blamed me for bringing the contract home. I blamed her for dismissing it first. We both blamed ourselves for putting Daniel out here because we needed money. We snapped at each other over stupid things. How tight the hatch was locked. Whether Daniel had brushed his teeth. Whether the galley window latch was secure. Because the real thing we wanted to scream about was the fact that our kids' dreams were turning the platform into a trap. "You want to go home?" she shouted at me one night after we'd spent hours mopping seawater off a floor that shouldn't have been wet. "Fine, we go home. We lose everything. We lose the house. We lose the insurance. Then what? We drown onshore in bills instead of out here in nightmares." "At least onshore," I snapped back, voice raw. "When you hear footsteps in the hallway, it's a fucking person." She slapped the bulkhead with her palm, hard enough to make it ring. "You don't know that." We went quiet after that because the bulkhead rang too long, like it was hollow. Daniel heard us fight and started hiding under his blanket during the day, refusing to come out until we talked soft again. Guilt chewed me from the inside. I'd look at his small shoulders shaking and feel like the worst father alive. Because what kind of protection is it to lock your kid in a steel box at sea with his own nightmares? The nightmares weren't random anymore. They got smarter, meaner. And then, one day, the unthinkable happened. I came back late from a brutal maintenance rundown in the underwater module, the one with the listening arrays. A valve had seized, and they needed someone small enough to squeeze between two panels in a corridor that felt like a coffin. I'd spent 2 hours down there with my hands numb, my ears popping from pressure changes, the hull creaking around me like an old ship in a storm. The pinging was louder down there. It echoed through the metal like a heartbeat. When I finally got back topside and walked into our module, already felt wrong. Like I brought something up with me. Like the sea had tagged me. My wife wasn't home. That wasn't unusual. She worked nights sometimes doubles. But the module felt too quiet. The hum of the HVAC seemed softer, as if something was dampening sound. Daniel sat in his cabin with the rack curtain half closed. I could see his knees pulled up to his chest under the blanket. "Hey," I said gently, forcing normal. "What's wrong, bud?" He didn't look up. His voice came out muffled, thick with tears. "He came." My skin went cold. "Who came?" I asked, stepping closer, keeping my voice low. The air smelled faintly of brine and something rotten, like fish left too long in a bucket. Daniel lifted the blanket just enough for me to see his face. His cheeks were wet. His eyes were huge. "He hurt Mommy." I didn't answer right away because my brain tried to do that thing where it rewrites words into safer ones. Misheard. Misunderstood. He meant scared Mommy. He meant she yelled. He meant she got pinched by a hatch. "Hurt how?" I asked, and it came out too sharp. "Where is she?" Daniel's mouth quivered like he was trying not to make a sound that would bring attention. "She'll be here soon," he whispered. That hit me like a slap because it wasn't an answer. It was a line, like he was repeating something someone told him, or something he saw. My eyes flicked past him to the corridor. The emergency strips were on like always, dim green. The module hummed. But under that, there was another sound that didn't belong. A faint gurgle, like water moving in a pipe that should have been empty. I stepped closer and crouched at his rack. "Daniel, listen to me. Was this a dream? Did you fall asleep?" He shook his head violently, eyes glassy. "No, he came. He was here." "Who is he?" I forced myself to keep my voice low, but the words shook anyway. "Which one?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Don't say it loud." I almost laughed from stress. I almost snapped at him. We'd spent weeks trying to act like naming them didn't matter, that the rules mattered, the actions mattered. But my kid cared about names like they were passwords. "Honey," I started because my wife's name got stuck in my throat. "Mom isn't here. You're safe. I'm here. Tell me what happened." Daniel's hands came out from under the blanket and gripped my wrist with a strength that didn't feel like a 6-year-old. His nails dug in. "Shoo," he said, and his voice cracked. "They'll hear us. They?" I whispered back, and I hated myself for playing along. "Who will hear us?" He didn't answer, just stared past my shoulder at the corridor like he was watching something approach. That's when the module hatch clicked. Not the normal heavy latch sound when a tired worker comes in and drops their boots. This was softer, careful, like someone trying to be quiet, like a kid sneaking. And then, from the corridor, my wife's voice called out, too normal, too bright. "Honey, I'm home." Every hair on my arms lifted. My mouth went dry, so fast my tongue stuck, because I'd been in the underwater module when she was supposed to be up in the control room. There was no way she'd already be back, unless she'd left early. Unless she'd been hurt and sent down. Unless... I looked at Daniel. His face crumpled, and he shook his head, tiny, frantic. "Don't go out there," he whispered. "We have to hide." The way he said, "hide," wasn't like a kid wanting to play. It was like a diver saying, "get to the chamber." Like there was one move that saved your life. "I need to see her," I whispered, and my voice was pure panic now. "If she's hurt." "You can't," Daniel hissed, and tears slid down his face without sound. "It's not her." In the corridor, my wife's voice came again, closer. There was a faint scraping sound with it, like someone dragging a boot toe on metal. "Are you guys awake?" she called. "Daniel? Come say hi." My hand lifted toward the curtain of Daniel's rack like I could pull it closed, and that would solve anything. Daniel tightened his grip on my wrist and leaned close enough I could smell the child sweat and the faint salt that always clung to him out here. The one who came was, he swallowed. His eyes flicked to the corridor again. The scraping got louder, clumsier, the one who brings them up. My stomach lurched. What the fuck does that mean? Daniel's lips barely moved. The one who takes people down and brings them back wrong. My pulse hammered. I forced myself to think like a worker, like a husband, like a dad, like a person who still believed reality was stable. "Daniel," I whispered, urgent. "Is Mom alive?" He nodded once, small. "He heard her." "Where?" Daniel's eyes widened like he could see it again. "In the water." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. In the water could mean anything out here. The ocean was everywhere. The moon pool, the washdown hoses, the sump, the drains, the slick deck after rain. My wife's voice called again, and this time it was right outside Daniel's cabin. "Honey," she said, and there was something off now, a slight delay between syllables, like the voice had to think about how to shape the words. "Open up. It's cold." Daniel shook his head violently. "Don't answer." I didn't answer. I didn't move. The doorknob turned. Slow. Testing. It stopped. Then, from the other side, something heavy shifted its weight. I heard a soft thump, like a shoulder pressing against the door. My wife's voice, still her voice, murmured, "It's okay." "I'm okay," Daniel whimpered. I put my free hand over his mouth without thinking. Not hard, just enough to keep him from making a sound. My own breath sounded too loud in my ears, mixed with that faint, steady pinging I'd been hearing more and more lately, like a heartbeat in steel. Ping, ping, ping. The door didn't open. Not yet. Like it was waiting for us to do something first. Like it wanted us to choose. I leaned in, lips near Daniel's ear, and whispered, If you wake up, does it go away? His eyes squeezed shut. He shook his head. I'm awake, he whispered back, voice shaking. I've been awake. It's still here. That hit me harder than anything. The rule, our one reliable rule, was waking Daniel ended it. If he was awake and it was still here, then either the rule was broken or something had changed. Outside the door, there was a quiet, wet sound. Drip, drip, like seawater falling from something onto the deck. My wife's voice sighed. I can smell you. Daniel's whole body jerked like he'd been slapped. I felt my own skin crawl. I glanced around his cabin, dumb, looking for something to do. There was nowhere to hide. A kid's cabin on a platform is a rack, a locker, a few toys shoved into a net. You could crawl under the rack, but you'd still be within arm's reach of the door. The doorknob turned again. Harder. Daniel grabbed my shirt and pulled me toward the rack like he wanted us both in there together. Like he thought the rack would protect us. Dad, he whispered, and the word cracked in half. Don't let it see you. It already knows I'm here. I whispered back, trying not to lose it. It called my name. Daniel shook his head again, frantic. It wants you to come out. Outside, there was a sound like someone learning to walk. Not normal footsteps. Not the quick slap of bare feet, like the one who pretends to be human. These were heavy, clumsy thuds with little scuffs between them, like someone dragging something they couldn't lift properly. The footsteps moved away from our door down the corridor. For a second, relief flooded me so hard I almost sagged. Then the footsteps turned back, coming straight toward us again, faster now, still clumsy like a drunk wearing boots. Daniel sucked in a breath. He's bringing her. My heart smashed against my ribs. Ooh, Daniel whispered the name again, barely audible, like saying it would make it stronger. The one who brings them up. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Silence. Then a violent kick slammed into the cabin door so hard the whole frame shuddered. The latch popped. The door flew inward. The corridor light spilled in, and in that pale green glow, my wife stood in the doorway. Except she wasn't standing right. Her head hung slightly to one side, like her neck couldn't hold it. Her hair was wet, plastered to her face. Her uniform clung to her body, dark with seawater. Her boots squelched when she shifted, and water dripped steadily from her sleeves and the hem of her pants onto Daniel's cabin deck. She looked swollen, the way drowned bodies look after too long in cold water. Skin pale with a bluish cast, lips gray, fingertips wrinkled. But her eyes were open, and they weren't her eyes. They were too clear, too bright, staring straight at me with a weird, delighted focus, like it had finally found what it wanted. Behind her, in the corridor, something moved low to the ground, like a shape dragging itself forward, hidden by her legs and the doorframe. I could hear the clumsy scuffing sound again, closer now, and with it, a faint bubbling gurgle, like breath being pushed through water. My wife's mouth opened, and my wife's voice came out, wet and thick. I had said. Daniel made a strangled sound. I felt him trembling against my side. I took a step back, automatically bumping into the rack. My brain screamed at me to do something. Wake Daniel. He was already awake. Run. There was nowhere. Fight against what? A drowned thing wearing my wife like a suit? The shape behind her shifted. A hand. No, not a hand. Something like a hand slid up onto the doorframe from the corridor side. Pale, slick, with long fingers ending in blackened nails. It hooked into the metal like claws. My wife, her body, tilted its head and smiled. The smile was wrong because her lips didn't move like skin should move. Like the face was stiff. It hurt, she said, and the words came slow, like it had to chew them. But I'm here now. Daniel whispered, Dad, don't. I didn't get a chance to answer because my wife's body lunged. Not like a human stepping forward, like something yanking a puppet on a string. Cold hands grabbed my throat. They were my wife's hands, same shape, same wedding band, but the skin felt wrong. Too cold, too soft, like it had been soaked. The grip was insane, crushing, thumbs digging into my windpipe. My vision went white at the edges immediately. I clawed at the hands, gagging, trying to suck air through a throat that was closing. Her face was inches from mine. I could smell her, and it wasn't her normal soap and sweat. It was brine and rot and something like oil, thick and sweet, like a bilge pit. Her eyes stared into mine, and behind them, I saw nothing human, just hunger and amusement. In the corridor behind her, the dragging shape made a sound, a low, bubbling chuckle, like laughter through water. Daniel screamed my name. The cabin spun, my ears filled with that sonar pinging, louder now, rapid like an alarm. Ping, 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 ping. Then everything went black. I came back like a diver, breaking the surface too fast, gasping, choking, lungs burning like they were full of salt. I sat bolt upright in our bed in our cabin, hands clutching my own throat so hard my fingers hurt. The overhead light was off. The cabin was dim with moonlight through the porthole. The platform hum was steady and normal. Beside me, my wife lay on her side, asleep. Her hair was dry. Her breathing was even. Her hand rested on the pillow, wedding band glinting faintly. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My whole body shook. Sweat slid cold down my back. My throat ached like it had been crushed, and when I swallowed, it hurt. I turned my head slowly, watching my wife's chest rise and fall, waiting for her eyes to snap open and go too bright. Nothing. She sighed in her sleep and shifted, normal. Relief hit me so hard I almost sobbed. It was a dream, I whispered, but my voice sounded like bullshit even to me. I shoved out of bed and stumbled into the corridor, barefoot, heart still racing. The air in the module tasted like metal and salt, same as always. I went to Daniel's cabin and stood in the doorway, not even breathing, waiting for something on the ceiling, waiting for wet footsteps, waiting for my wife's drowned face. Daniel slept in his rack, sprawled sideways, one arm hanging off, mouth open slightly. His curtain was half pulled, like he'd kicked it in his sleep. No monster, no dripping, no clumsy dragging shape. I sank onto the corridor deck, right outside his cabin, my back against the bulkhead, and pressed my fists in my eyes until sparks danced behind my lids. Just a dream. The platform does weird things to you. The underwater module, the pressure changes, the lack of real sleep. My brain had finally snapped and made a nightmare out of the things I feared most. I stayed there until my breathing slowed and my hands stopped shaking enough to unclench. Then I stood up because the human body doesn't care about trauma, it cares about habits, and I needed to pee, same as before. I took 2 steps down the corridor and my foot brushed something soft on the deck. I froze. Slowly I looked down. There, in the middle of the corridor, lay a strip of cloth. Not one of her shirts. Not a towel. It was a piece of my wife's uniform sleeve. Dark blue fabric with the reflective tape, torn clean, as if ripped. It was damp, heavy with salt water, and stuck to the deck slightly like it had been pressed down. On it clung a smear of something pale and stringy. Seaweed. No, not seaweed. It was too thin, too translucent like tissue. I crouched, fingers trembling, and touched the fabric. Cold. Not cool. Cold like it had come from deep water where sunlight never reaches. I jerked my hand back. My fingertips stung as if I'd touched ice. My brain screamed at me to wake my wife, to call security, to scream, to do anything but stand there in the dim corridor, holding a piece of wet uniform that shouldn't exist. Instead, because I'm a fucking idiot, and also because denial is powerful, I carried it to the galley sink and ran fresh water over it. The water beaded on the fabric like the fabric didn't want to get wet, like it was already too full of some other water. A faint smell rose as the fresh water hit it. Brine, oat, oil, the same smell from the drowned thing's mouth. My stomach heaved. I gagged hard, choking on nothing. Behind me, from Daniel's cabin, I heard him mumble in his sleep. Not loud, just a little sleepy sentence, like kids do when they talk to themselves. He's counting, Daniel murmured. He's counting to 10 now, Dad. Every muscle in my body locked. The running water, sounded suddenly too loud. I shut it off and stood there in the galley, staring at the black porthole window. The sea outside was invisible, but I could feel it. The ocean pressed against the platform legs, against every bolt and weld. The platform wasn't on the sea. It was in it, embedded, trapped. I carried the torn sleeve to our cabin and shoved it into a zip bag like it was evidence of a crime. I didn't know what I planned to do with it. Show it to the medic? HR? The OIM? They'd say it was a torn uniform. They'd say it was a laundry accident. They'd say anything that kept their world clean. I crawled back into bed beside my wife and lay there rigid, listening to her breathe. I didn't sleep. Morning came in that offshore way, where it's never truly morning, just a shift in light. The module speakers crackled with announcements. People stomped in the corridor. Somewhere a coffee machine gurgled. Normal life restarted like a machine turning on. My wife woke and stretched, groaning, and smiled at me without thinking. "You look like shit," she said, voice rough. "Rough night." My mouth opened and closed. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to shove the zip bag in her face and scream, "Explain this." Instead, because I was terrified of what her reaction might trigger, I said, "Daniel had a bad dream." My wife's smile faded instantly. She sat up, suddenly awake. Again, I nodded. She rubbed her face, frustration and fear and exhaustion all mixing. "We can't keep doing this," she said, voice low. "We can't keep living like we're in a fucking haunted diving bell." "It's not haunted." I snapped automatically, then immediately hated myself because I sounded like I was still arguing with reality. It's him. It's his dreams." My wife stared at the bulkhead as if she could see through it to the water beyond. "Then we take him off," she said hard. "I don't care about the contract anymore. I don't care about the money. We're taking him off." I almost laughed bitter. "And go where?" "They'll drop our permits. They'll cut us off. They'll say we broke policy." "I'll break their fucking policy," she said, and there was a vicious steadiness in her voice that scared me because it sounded like she'd already decided to start a war with the platform. "Fine," I said too fast. "Fine. We go." We didn't, of course, because the platform doesn't let you just go. You need a boat, a helicopter, a schedule, approval, paperwork, weather windows, and most importantly, you need the company to agree your kids' nightmares are a reason to move expensive assets. We tried to request evac anyway. My wife went to the medic and said Daniel was having severe sleep disturbances, that it was affecting safety. The medic gave her a look that was half pity, half warning. "I can't call medevac for nightmares," he said quietly. "You know that." "They're not nightmares," she snapped. She stopped, her lips pressed tight. "He's not okay." The medic sighed. "If he's physically unwell, I can do something. If he's injured, if he's sick. Otherwise," he spread his hands helplessly. "You're asking me to say the platform is unsafe because of something I can't report." My wife's jaw clenched. "So we're trapped." The medic didn't answer because the answer was yes. The day dragged. Work pulled at me like it always did. Valves, pumps, checks, the normal grind that keeps a platform alive. But my mind kept flashing back to the drowned face in the doorway, to the cold hands crushing my throat, to that clumsy, dragging thing in the corridor behind her. I kept hearing that sonar pinging even in daylight. Ping, ping, ping. That evening, my wife came back from the control room with her face pale. She didn't say hello. She just shut the hatch behind her and leaned on it like she needed it to hold her up. "What?" I asked, instantly on edge. She swallowed. "They had an incident in the moon pool," she said. My stomach tightened. "What kind of incident?" "They found something," she said, and her voice dropped. "In the intake screen, like it got sucked up near the subsea module." "Istir derrière." "Like what?" My wife's eyes flicked to Daniel, who sat at the galley table drawing a picture of a boat with a big black scribble under it. "Later," she mouthed. Daniel looked up at us with that too-aware expression kids get when they know they're being talked about. He didn't ask. He just went back to drawing, pressing hard enough to tear paper. After we got him in his rack that night, after we triple-checked the hatch locks, after we taped the galley porthole scene because my wife had started believing tape was a kind of magic. My wife pulled me into our cabin and shut the door. "They found a body," she whispered. My throat tightened. "Who?" She shook her head. "Not one of ours. Not someone topside. Someone from the underwater module." A cold wave washed through me. "That module is sealed. It's staffed. They don't just lose people." My wife's face twisted. "They said it was a contractor. Someone who went down last week. They found his suit torn, like it got caught and pulled." I could feel my heart pounding in my fingertips. "They didn't recover him?" "They recovered pieces," she whispered, and her voice cracked. "And there was something else." "What?" My wife hesitated, like she was fighting with herself. Then she said, "They said there were handprints on the inside of the intake screen." My skin went numb. "Inside?" She nodded, eyes wide, like someone pressed from the inside out, like they were trying to get out. I thought of the wallpaper bulging, the hand coming through the bulkhead. I thought of Daniel whispering names like he was reading a map. "We have to get him off," I said, and my voice sounded like a stranger's. My wife nodded, fierce. "Tomorrow," she said. "I don't care what I have to say. I'll say he's sick. I'll say he's suicidal. I'll say—" "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't say anything that gets him flagged. Don't make them take him." My wife's eyes flashed. "What? You think they'll put him in a lab?" "I don't know," I snapped. "But I know they don't care about us. They care about liability. If they decide Daniel is the problem, they'll remove the problem." My wife stared at me like she wanted to hit me. Then she looked away, fists clenched. "So what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. That was the worst part. Out here, you can fix leaks. You can fix pumps. You can patch systems. But you can't patch whatever was crawling out of your kid's sleep. We went to bed anyway because you always do, even when you don't want to. Sleep is a gravity you can't escape. I lay there rigid beside my wife, listening to the platform hum, listening to distant water movement in pipes, listening for laughter. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under. I woke to a sound that didn't belong. Not a voice, not footsteps, a knock from outside the hall. Not outside the module door, outside the platform itself. A dull, heavy knock that traveled through steel and insulation and into my bones. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks, each one separated by a pause like whoever made them was thinking. I sat up, skin prickling. My wife stirred, half awake, and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Another knock came, deeper, closer, and it made the porthole glass vibrate faintly. The ocean doesn't knock like that. Debris hits randomly. Waves slap. But this was deliberate. A pattern. I slid out of bed and moved to the porthole window. Outside was black sea and faint starlight. Nothing visible. Just the endless surface shifting. Knock. This time it came from below, through the deck. My wife sat up fully, face pale. "What the fuck is that?" In the corridor, the emergency strips flickered once. And then, from Daniel's cabin, I heard his rack curtain rustle. I was already moving before my brain caught up. I threw our cabin door open and rushed down the corridor to his cabin. Daniel stood in the doorway of his cabin, barefoot, swaying, sleepwalking. His eyes were open, fixed on nothing. But this time, he wasn't muttering under the bed. He was humming, a low, slow tune, like a lullaby heard through water, warped and stretched. It matched the rhythm of the knocks outside. Knock, hum, knock, hum. My mouth went dry. "Daniel," I whispered. "Wake up." He didn't blink. My wife came up behind me, wrench in hand, breathing hard. "Don't touch him hard," she whispered, and I could hear panic in her voice. "You shook him last time, and it saved us." I snapped, not caring anymore. I put my hands on Daniel's shoulders. His skin was cold again, damp. He hummed louder, and the corridor air suddenly smelled like deep water, like mud and old shells, not open sea, like a lake bottom, like something stirred up. Knock. The whole module shuddered subtly with it. My wife's voice went tight. "That's coming from the legs," she whispered. "From outside. Knock." Daniel's head tilted slowly toward me, still asleep, and he murmured, "He's bringing her up again." My blood went cold. "Who?" I hissed. Daniel's lips moved, and the name slid out of him like it was already waiting there. "The one who brings them up." My wife made a choking sound. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Down the corridor, toward the module hatch, I heard the latch click. Slow, careful, like someone sneaking in. My wife grabbed my arm. Her grip hurt. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't let it in. It's already in." I whispered back, eyes on Daniel's blank face. The hatch latch clicked again, louder, like a second lock being undone. Then the scraping started. That clumsy, scuffing sound like someone dragging boots wrong. It moved down the corridor toward us. My wife's breathing went ragged. "Wake him," she whispered, voice desperate. "Wake him now. He's sleepwalking," I whispered, and the words were insane because that was the least of our problems. "Waking him. We have no choice," she snapped, and there was a vicious edge, like she was ready to break rules now. "Wake him." I grabbed Daniel and shook him hard. "Daniel, wake up." His humming stopped mid-note. His eyes blinked, unfocused, then snapped to me. "Dad," he whispered, confused. At the exact same moment, the scraping sound in the corridor stopped. Silence slammed down so hard it felt like pressure. Then, from just outside Daniel's cabin door, a wet breath sounded. A thick inhale like air pulled through water. My wife's face drained of color. "It didn't go away," she whispered. I stared at the corridor, muscles locked. "Daniel's awake," I whispered, more to myself than anyone. "He's awake." Daniel looked between us, eyes widening as he sensed the fear. "What's happening?" he whispered, voice shaking. "Is he here?" The wet breath came again, closer, like whatever was out there was leaning toward the crack under the door. I could see it now, a thin line of water seeping under the cabin door, spreading on the corridor deck. Salt water. Cold. My wife backed up a step, wrench raised like it would matter. "Open it," a voice whispered from the corridor. Not my wife's voice. Not Daniel's. Something else, trying to sound like a person. Like a person who'd listened to enough humans to mimic the shape. "Open it," it whispered again. "He's waiting." Daniel started trembling. "That's him," he whispered. "That's the one who brings them up." My heart slammed. "What do we do?" I whispered to Daniel, hating myself for asking my kid for instructions. Daniel's eyes filled. "Hide," he whispered, and his voice sounded like he was about to break. "If it sees you, it takes you down." My wife shook her head hard. "No," she whispered. "No, we're not hiding. We're not playing. Fuck this." She stepped forward suddenly and yanked Daniel's cabin door open. The corridor beyond was empty. For 1/2 second, relief hit me so hard my knees went weak. Then I saw the water. The corridor deck was wet all the way to the hatch, like seawater had been poured in a line. It reflected the emergency strip lights in broken, shimmering streaks. And in that reflection, I saw something that wasn't in the corridor itself. A shape, low to the ground, crawling toward us. I jerked my gaze up. Nothing. I looked down again. The reflection showed it clearly. Pale arms dragging. A head tilted wrong. Hair floating like it was underwater. Its mouth open in a silent scream. Bubbles rising from it even though there was no water above it. My wife saw it too. She made a sound like she was about to vomit. Daniel screamed. The moment he screamed, the corridor lights flickered hard, and the reflection rippled as if the water was disturbed from below. A wet hand slapped onto the corridor deck, right in front of our door. Not in the reflection. Real. Pale. Slick. Fingers too long. It dragged itself forward, and as it moved, the water on the deck didn't splash like normal water. It clung to it, like the water wanted to go with it. My wife swung the wrench down hard on the hand. Metal hit flesh with a sick, damp thud, like hitting a fish. The hand didn't flinch. It tightened on the deck and pulled again. A head rose into view at floor level, like someone peeking over the edge of a pool. It was my wife's face again, but worse than before. Her skin looked blanched, bloated, with tiny cracks like something had dried and re-wet too many times. Her eyes were open too wide, staring upward at me and my wife like prey. Her mouth stretched into a grin that split the corners, water pouring out in a slow stream like a leak. My wife made a strangled sob. "That's not me," she whispered like she needed to hear it. The thing smiled wider, and my wife's voice came out of it, wet and thick. It gurgled. "Come down." Behind that face, the corridor water rippled, and another shape moved beneath it, bigger, darker, like a shadow under ice. The sonar pinging in my skull went crazy, rapid, overlapping. Ping, ping, ping. Daniel clutched my leg, screaming. "Wake up," he cried, not to himself, but to us. "Wake up, wake up, wake up." My wife swung the wrench again, screaming curses, hitting the thing's face. The wrench dented skin like wet clay. The face didn't bleed. It just deformed, then slid back into place slowly, like it wasn't made of real tissue. The thing's hand grabbed my wife's ankle. My wife stumbled, almost fell, and for one terrifying second, I saw her being dragged toward the corridor water like the deck had turned into a current. I lunged and grabbed her under the arms and yanked back. The hand's grip was insane. Cold. It felt like something that didn't care about friction or pain. Daniel screamed louder, and his scream turned into a sobbing chant. "Wake up," he cried. "Wake up, wake up, wake up." My wife twisted and slammed her boot heel down on the hand's fingers. Something cracked. The fingers bent wrong. The hand loosened just enough. I yanked my wife back into Daniel's cabin and slammed the door shut with my shoulder. The latch clicked. For a second, there was silence except our ragged breathing and Daniel's sobs. Then something heavy hit the door from the corridor side. Not a kick, a full body slam. The whole frame shuddered. Water seeped under the door faster now, spreading in a thin sheet across Daniel's cabin floor. My wife backed up, wrench raised. "It's in," she whispered, voice shaking with rage. "It's fucking in." Daniel crawled onto his rack, pulling the curtain like it could hide him. He curled into a ball, shaking. "I didn't want him," he sobbed. "I didn't want him to come." Another slam hit the door, and the latch groaned. My wife looked at me, eyes wild. "If it sees us," she whispered, "it takes us down." "Down where?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. I just knew down. Out here meant pressure and dark and no air. The sonar pinging in my bones slowed suddenly, becoming a slow, deliberate rhythm again. Ping, ping, ping. Each ping matched a new slam against the door. My wife's face twisted. "It's counting," she whispered. Daniel sobbed harder. "He counts," he cried. "He always counts." The door latch popped. The door started to open an inch. Cold, wet air rushed in, smelling like deep mud and rot. My wife surged forward and shoved the door, closed with her shoulder, bracing it, wrench in her fist. "Help me," she snarled at me. I slammed my body against the door too, both of us holding it shut, feeling the pressure from the other side like a current pushing. Outside, the wet voice whispered close to the seam. "I brought her," it gurgled. "I can bring you back too." My wife screamed, "Go to hell." The voice chuckled, bubbles popping. "No," it whispered. "Down." The pressure against the door increased. The metal creaked. The hinges groaned like they were under load. My wife's arms shook with strain. "Daniel," she shouted over her shoulder. "Make it stop." Daniel sobbed, voice muffled from behind the rack curtain. "I can't," he cried. "I can't make it stop. I am awake. I am awake." That single sentence sliced through me. The rule didn't work. Waking him didn't end it anymore. That meant either the nightmares had evolved, or something had latched on that wasn't leaving just because a kid opened his eyes. My mind flashed back to the underwater module, to the pinging, to the handprints inside the intake screen, to something down there listening. My wife's breath hitched. "It's going to break through," she gasped. The door buckled inward an inch as something heavy pressed against it. I looked around Daniel's cabin desperately. There was nothing. No escape hatch. No window big enough. Just steel and bolts and the ocean outside. And then my eyes fell on the rack. Daniel's fish night light sat there by his pillow, cheap plastic, and underneath it, the button that played ocean sounds. A stupid thing, a child's toy, but when you're drowning, you grab anything that floats. I shouted, "Daniel, the night light, turn on." Daniel's sobbing paused, confused. "What? Turn on." I screamed, and I hated myself for screaming at him, but terror makes you cruel. "Hit the button, now." Daniel's small hand appeared from the curtain, fumbling, and then the night light clicked on. A recorded ocean sound filled the cabin. Gentle waves, distant gulls, soft wind. Normal sea sounds. Daytime sea sounds. Not the deep pressure dark. The effect was instant and so fucking weird it almost broke my brain. The pressure against the door paused. The wet whisper outside went silent. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the stupid toy waves and our breathing. My wife looked at me, eyes wide, like she couldn't believe what was happening. Then, from the corridor, came a sound like something inhaling sharply, as if it had been surprised. A low, angry gurgle. The pressure slammed back against the door harder than before, as if whatever was out there had realized we'd done something it didn't like. My wife screamed in frustration. "That didn't do shit." "It did," I gasped, straining. "It reacted. Keep it on." The door bowed inward another inch. The latch was barely holding. My wife's voice shook. "We can't hold this." I looked at the rack curtain and saw Daniel's wide, terrified eyes peeking out, watching us like he was watching his parents die. Something in me snapped. Not bravery, not heroism, just a dumb animal refusal. I shouted over the noise, "Daniel, think. What scares it? What did you dream?" Daniel's face crumpled. "It doesn't get scared," he sobbed. "It's not scared of anything." "Then what stops it?" I screamed. Daniel swallowed hard, eyes darting, remembering. It hates when you don't look," he whispered. "What?" "It wants you to see it," Daniel sobbed. "It wants you to watch it bring them up. If you don't look, it can't." His voice trailed off because the door slammed again and the latch finally broke. The door burst inward. Cold seawater rushed in like it had been waiting, spilling across the cabin floor, rising instantly to our ankles, then our shins. Not a drip, a flood. The cabin filled like a compartment flooding. My wife stumbled, wrench raised, and I saw it in the doorway. Not my wife's face this time. Something taller. Something that filled the corridor like the corridor was too small for it. A shape like a person in a diving suit, except wrong. Too long. Too thin. The suit looked like it had been patched together from old rubber and seaweed and torn uniform fabric. Water poured from seams like leaks. Its helmet was a smooth black dome, but in the dome, I saw a faint reflection like a face pressed from inside, shifting, trying to form. Behind it, floating in the corridor water like a puppet on invisible strings, was my wife's body. Drowned, limp, eyes open, mouth stretched. My actual wife screamed. Not a little scream. A full-body scream that ripped out of her like she'd been punched in the gut. The suit thing raised a hand, slow, deliberate, like it was presenting a prize. The wet voice came from it, layered like multiple voices gurgling through one throat. "See," it whispered. I brought her. My throat locked. My brain screamed at me to look away, to not give it what it wanted. But how do you not look at your own wife's dead body floating in your corridor? My wife lunged forward, wrench swinging, screaming curses, trying to smash the helmet. The wrench hit the black dome with a metallic clang. The sound was wrong. Not metal on metal. More like metal on thick glass under pressure. The dome didn't dent. It vibrated, and the vibration traveled down my arms through the water and into my teeth. The suit thing didn't move. It didn't flinch. My wife swung again. Clang. The dome vibrated again, and this time, a faint crack appeared across it, like a hairline fracture. The suit thing tilted its head, slowly, almost curious. Then it reached out and grabbed my wife's wrist. Her scream cut off into a choke as its grip tightened. And then the water in the cabin shifted. Not sloshed. Shifted like a current suddenly formed. pulling toward the doorway. My wife's feet slid on the flooded deck. She tried to brace, but the current dragged her toward the suit thing, toward the corridor, toward the deeper water beyond. I grabbed her around the waist and yanked back with everything I had. Daniel screamed behind us. The suit thing's helmet turned toward me, and I felt it look at me even though there were no eyes. The sonar pinging exploded in my skull, loud enough to make me see stars. Ping, ping, ping. The wet voice whispered, closer now like it was inside my ear. Come down, it said. I could bring you back too. My wife's face twisted in pure rage and terror. She spat seawater and screamed, "Let me go." The suit thing tightened its grip, and my wife's wrist made a small cracking sound, like bone protesting. I lost it. I leaned forward and bit the suit thing's arm. I don't know why. It was pure animal. Pure panic. Teeth into rubber and something slimy underneath. The taste hit my mouth immediately. Salt and metal and rot and oil. It was like biting into a dead fish mixed with a battery. I gagged, nearly vomited, but I kept my teeth clenched because I had nothing else. The suit thing didn't flinch, but the wet voice changed. It shifted into something lower, irritated. "You shouldn't," it gurgled. It released my wife's wrist suddenly and grabbed my throat. Cold fingers closed around my neck, stronger than anything human, and lifted. My feet left the flooded deck. I choked, clawing, tried to pull the fingers away. My vision tunneled. The cabin spun. In that spinning blur, I saw Daniel on his rack. Eyes huge, mouth open in a silent scream because he couldn't make sound anymore. The stupid nightlight waves kept playing, cheerful and normal, like an insult. My wife lunged forward, wrench raised, and smashed the helmet dome again, right on that hairline crack. Clang. This time, the dome cracked wider. A thin line of black water seeped out. Not splashing, just oozing. The suit thing's grip loosened a fraction, like it had felt pain for the first time. My wife swung again, screaming my name like it could pull me back. Clang. The dome fractured with a sharp sound like ice breaking. And then something inside the helmet shifted, pushing outward like pressure, finding a weakness. A face pressed against the cracked dome from inside. Not my wife's face. Not Daniel's. Not any human face. It was pale and stretched, with too many teeth visible through split lips, eyes like dark holes that reflected the emergency strips in long, thin streaks. It smiled. My wife froze for half a second, horror stopping her mid-swing. That half second was enough. The suit thing yanked me forward. The current in the cabin intensified, pulling everything toward the doorway. The water rose to my chest as I was dragged. I felt my body slide through the doorway into the corridor, and the corridor didn't look like our corridor anymore. It looked longer, darker. The emergency strips stretched into green lines like reflections underwater. The walls looked wet, dripping. The ceiling seemed higher, like we were inside a tunnel. And beyond the corridor, where the hatch should have been, there was not the accommodations deck. There was water, a wall of black water pressing in like a door. My lungs screamed. My throat burned. The cold grip tightened. The wet voice whispered again, right against my ear. "Down," it said, delighted. "Down is quiet." My wife screamed behind me, and I felt her hands grab my ankle, trying to hold me back. I felt her nails dig in, desperate. Daniel screamed too, his voice thin and breaking. And then, over all of it, I heard the knocks again. Knock, knock, knock. Not on the hull now, on the inside of my skull. The sonar pinging became a roar. Ping, ping, ping. My vision went black at the edges. And then, suddenly, my wife shouted something. One word, raw and furious. "Daniel!" Her voice cut through everything like a knife. Daniel's scream stopped abruptly, like he'd been slapped into silence. For a second, the current paused. The grip on my throat loosened just enough for a thin gasp. And in that gasping moment, Daniel's voice came, small and trembling from behind us. "Stop," he whispered. "Not to us. To it. I don't want to play," he said, voice shaking. I don't want you to bring them up. I don't want you. The corridor water rippled. The suit thing's grip paused. The wet voice gurgled, confused. But you called. I didn't, Daniel whispered, and his voice got stronger, like a kid finally refusing bedtime. I didn't call you. You came anyway. Go away. The water under my feet shifted again, unstable. The suit thing's helmet turned slowly toward Daniel, as if focusing on him for the first time. The pale face inside the cracked dome pressed closer, teeth visible, and the wet voice whispered, almost pleading. Play. Daniel's voice rose, shaky but loud enough to fill the flooded module. No. The moment he shouted, something snapped. Not a physical sound, a feeling, like a pressure seal breaking. The corridor around me shimmered like heat distortion, except cold. The black water beyond the hatch flickered like a bad screen. The suit thing's grip loosened suddenly, and I dropped into water with a splash that felt wrong, like splashing into something thicker than water. I gasped, sucking air, choking on salt. My wife yanked me backward hard, dragging me toward Daniel's cabin. The suit thing convulsed like it had been hit by a current. The cracked helmet dome vibrated violently, and black water poured out in a sudden rush. The pale face inside twisted, mouth opening wide, and the wet voice screamed. Not a human scream, a bubbling, roaring sound like something drowning. Then it collapsed. It didn't fall like a body. It crumpled like a suit emptied of air, folding in on itself, spilling seawater onto the deck. The floating drowned body, my wife's body, slammed down beside it with a wet thud, water splashing. My actual wife screamed and stumbled back, hands over her mouth, eyes wide. The water in the corridor drained instantly, not flowing to a drain, just vanishing like it had never existed. The corridor snapped back to normal. Emergency strips steady, walls dry, hatch solid and closed. The only thing left was the suit, a pile of wet, rotten rubber and seaweed and torn fabric on the corridor deck. And beside it, a soaked chunk of uniform sleeve, reflective tape gleaming. My wife and I stood there, shaking, staring at it like it might stand back up. Daniel sobbed quietly behind his rack curtain. My wife's hands trembled so hard she dropped the wrench. It clanged on metal and made us both flinch. And then, because the universe loves cruelty, the platform intercom crackled. "Attention all personnel," a calm voice said. Routine sonar sweep commencing. A faint pinging sound filled the module, slow and steady. Ping, ping, ping. My wife turned to me, eyes wild. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, throat raw. "It's always there," I whispered. "It's been there." My wife's voice shook with rage and fear. "It's connected," she whispered. "The underwater module. The arrays. Something down there." "Don't," I whispered because saying it out loud felt like drawing a map for it. "Don't give a name." My wife stared at the pile on the deck. "That's real," she whispered. "That's not a dream." I looked at the wet suit pile and felt something inside me crack because I couldn't deny it anymore. It was tangible. It stank. It dripped. It existed. I crouched slowly and touched the rubber. It was cold, and under the rubber, I felt something hard. I pulled the rubber aside with trembling fingers. There was a hand, not a whole body, just a hand. Pale, slick, too long in the fingers. The skin looked like it had been in water too long. The hand was fused into the rubber like it had grown there. I jerked back, gagging, and my wife made a choking sound and turned away, dry heaving. Daniel's sobbing got louder, panicked. "Dad," he cried. "Is he gone?" I forced my voice steady and lied, because that's what parents do. "He's gone," I said. "He's gone." Daniel sniffed small. "For now," he whispered, and the words chilled me because they sounded like something older than him speaking through his mouth. My wife wiped her mouth with shaking hands and looked at me, eyes burning. "We're leaving," she said, and there was no argument left in her. "Today. I don't care what it costs. I don't care if they fire us. I don't care if we live in a fucking car. We are leaving." I nodded because for once I agreed completely. We didn't have time to plan. We didn't have time to be careful. We grabbed go bags, documents, Daniel's favorite toy, some cash, a change of clothes. My wife went to the OIM's office and didn't ask. She told, "My son is sick," she said, voice hard. "We're leaving on the next chopper." The OIM stared at her, annoyed. "That's not how." "He's sick," she repeated, and I could hear the threat under her words. "You want him collapsing on the deck? You want a kid dying on your platform? You want that report." The OIM's face tightened. He hated liability more than he hated us. "We have a supply. Flight tomorrow," he said. "Weather permitting." "Today," my wife said. He sighed like he was being inconvenienced. "There's no flight scheduled today." My wife leaned forward and placed her hands on his desk. "Then schedule one," she said, voice low and furious. I start telling people why my module flooded at night with no leak and why your subsea tech got found in pieces with handprints inside the intake screen. The OIM's eyes narrowed. "Watch your mouth." My wife smiled without humor. "Watch your fucking platform." He stared at her for a long moment, then looked away, jaw clenched. 2 hours, he said finally. "There's a medevac bird on standby for another rig. I'll reroute it. If you make this a problem." "It's already a problem," my wife snapped and walked out. When she told me we had 2 hours, I felt a rush of relief, so strong it almost made me dizzy. Then I looked at the pile of wet rubber and seaweed still hidden under our bed in a zip bag because we didn't know what to do with it, and relief curdled. Because leaving didn't erase what happened. Leaving didn't make the ocean stop being an ocean. We got Daniel dressed. He didn't fight. He moved like a kid moving through a dream, eyes too wide, hands shaking as he held his little toy fish. He kept glancing at the corridor like he expected the suit thing to drag itself back up. My wife and I carried our bags down the accommodations deck toward the helideck, surrounded by normal offshore life. Men in coveralls laughing, a supervisor shouting about paperwork, someone complaining about the coffee. No one looked at us twice. It made me furious. It made me want to grab someone and scream, "Do you understand what lies under you?" The helideck wind was brutal, salt spray hitting our faces. The sea stretched out in every direction, gray and endless. The platform legs disappeared into it like they were stabbed into something alive. The helicopter arrived with that familiar chop, 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 wind whipping, noise drowning thought. It settled onto the deck, and the pilot waved us in quick because offshore loading is always fast, always efficient, always like you're moving cargo. We climbed in. Daniel sat between us, strapped, clutching his toy fish like it was a life jacket. As the helicopter lifted, the platform shrank beneath us, becoming a small, ugly machine in a vast ocean. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in months. My wife stared out the window, jaw clenched. "We're gone," she whispered, as if saying it would lock it in. Daniel didn't look relieved. He stared down at the sea, eyes distant. "Daniel," I said, trying to sound gentle, "we're leaving. It can't follow us." It was tied to the platform. Daniel didn't answer. The helicopter banked, and the horizon shifted. The ocean below looked like a sheet of black glass. And then, for a split second, I saw it. A ripple in the water beneath us. A perfect circular disturbance, like something huge turning just under the surface. Not a wave, not a fish. Too big, too deliberate. In that ripple, for the briefest moment, something pale flashed like a face pressing up from below, looking at us through water. My throat went tight. My wife didn't see it. She kept staring at the platform, fists clenched. Daniel whispered, so softly I barely heard him over the helicopter noise. "He knows the way now," Daniel said. "What?" I leaned closer, heart pounding. Daniel didn't look at me. He kept looking down at the water. "He knows where we go," he whispered. "Because we looked. We saw him. He saw us." My skin went cold. "No, I whisperat fiercely. No, we're leaving. We're done." Daniel's eyes finally flicked to mine, and in them was something that didn't belong in a 6-year-old, an exhausted dread, like someone who'd been carrying a secret too heavy. He's counting, Daniel whispered. He always counts. And when he gets to 10, his voice trailed off because the helicopter shook suddenly in turbulence, and my wife grabbed Daniel tighter, swearing under her breath. We made it to shore. We got off the helicopter. We got into a company van that smelled like old sweat and cheap air freshener. We drove past docks and cranes and stacks of rusted containers, all of it still connected to water, still smelling of brine. We thought we were safe because our feet were on land. But water doesn't care about land. Water just waits. We rented a small place near the coast because that's where the company had housing. We told ourselves it was temporary. We told ourselves we'd move inland once we got paid out, once we found other work, once we rebuilt. The first night on shore, Daniel fell asleep in a real bed for the first time in months. Real sheets, real quiet. No constantum. My wife and I lay awake anyway, listening to the unfamiliar silence. I almost started to relax. Then, at around 2 in the morning, I heard dripping. Not from the bathroom sink, not from a pipe, from the corner of our bedroom ceiling, where there was no plumbing at all. Drip, drip. Cold drops hit the floor, leaving tiny dark circles. My wife sat up instantly, eyes wide. "No," she whispered, voice shaking. "No, no, no." I slid out of bed, heart pounding, and went to Daniel's room. He slept on his side, mouth open slightly, peaceful. For a second, relief surged. Then Daniel's lips moved in his sleep, and he whispered, clear as day, in a voice that wasn't fully his. "He's counting to 10 now, Dad.